Hello and welcome back to another lecture. In this lecture, we will learn how to use PowerShell to SSH into an EC2 instance in the private subnet. To complete this lecture, first make sure you have properly set up your VPC with public and private subnets. And to SSH into an EC2 instance in the private subnet, first we will launch an EC2 instance in the public subnet. This EC2 instance we launch in the public subnet is called the Bastion host or jump box. Once we've launched this EC2 instance in the public subnet, we will SSH into it, and from this EC2 instance, we will SSH into our EC2 instance in the private subnet. To start, the first thing we are going to do is create our security groups. We will create two security groups. The first security group we will create is the security group we will use to SSH into our Bastion host. And the second security group is the security group we will add to the web server in the private subnet that we want to SSH into. In the management console, type VPC in the search box and select VPC under services. On the VPC dashboard, the first thing I want you to do is filter by your VPC that has the public and private subnet you want to use to complete this lecture. So I'm going to select this drop down. This dev VPC is my VPC with public and private subnet. I'll select it. Once you filter by your VPC, scroll down to Security section. Under the Security section, select Security Groups. The first security group we will create is the security group we will add to the Bastion host. So select Create Security Group. Give the security group a name. I'll call it SSH Security Group. Once you've given it a name, we will give it a description. I'll use the same name as the description. Next, we will select the VPC we want to create this security group in. I'm going to click this X to remove the default VPC, and I'll select my dev VPC. This is the VPC that has the public and private subnet. Then scroll down. Under Inbound Rule, click Add Rule, and under Type, select this drop down, and let's look for SSH. Select it. SSH always work on port 22, and for the source, we are going to select this drop down. For security purpose, you should always limit your SSH source to your IP address. So we will select my IP, and that is going to limit your SSH source to your IP address. Then scroll down and click Create Security Group. We have successfully created the SSH security group, and you can see it here. If you scroll down, this is the inbound rule. We opened port 22 and we limit the source to our IP address. Next, we will create the second security group. Select Security Groups here. Then click Create Security Group. We will add this security group to the web server in the private subnet that we want to SSH into. So I'll call this security group Web Server Security Group. Once you've given the security group a name, I'll use the same name as the description. Once you've added the description, next we will select the VPC. Remove the default VPC by clicking this X. Then we are going to select our VPC with the public and private subnet. In my account, it is the dev VPC. I'll select it. Then scroll down. Under Inbound Rule, I'm going to click Add Rule. Under Type, select this drop down and select SSH. SSH is always on port 22, and this time for the web server security group, we will only allow traffic on port 22 if that traffic is coming from the SSH security group we previously created. So in this search box under Source, I want you to scroll down and select the SSH security group under Security Groups. This is the SSH security group we previously created. Once you select the SSH security group, scroll down and click Create Security Group. There you go. We have successfully created the web server security group. And if we scroll down, we open port 22, and the source is coming from the SSH security group we previously created. When you are setting up your security groups to SSH into an EC2 instance in the private subnet, this is the first thing you need to do. Once you have created your security groups, the next thing you need to do is create your key pair. So in the search box, type EC2. and select EC2 under Services. On the EC2 dashboard, scroll down. Under Network and Security, select Key Pairs. Then click Create Key Pair. Give the key pair a name. Once you've given the key pair a name, under Key Pair Type, we will leave it at RSA. Then scroll down. Under Private Key Format, since we are using PowerShell to SSH into our EC2 instance, make sure you select PEM format. So click .pem, then click Create Key Pair. We have successfully created the key pair, and you can see it here. One thing I want to mention about key pair is, when you create a key pair, two keys will be generated for you. The key you see in the management console here, this is your public key, and this is the key you add to your EC2 instance when you launch it. Once you have added this public key in your EC2 instance, in order to SSH into that EC2 instance, you need the private key that was downloaded on your computer. And if you look down here, you can see the private key that was downloaded on my computer. In case if you don't see this, usually any file you download on a Windows computer will be in your downloads directory. So for example, if I right click on this file and I click Show in Folder, and as you can see, that private key is in my downloads directory. Once you have created the key pair, the next thing I always do is move the key pair into the home directory on my computer. This makes it easy to SSH into my EC2 instance. Let me explain what I mean. Open PowerShell on your computer. I'll select the Start menu, and I'm going to type PowerShell in the search box. Once you type PowerShell in the search box, you will see the Windows PowerShell app. Click it to open it. When you open PowerShell on your computer, it always opens to your home directory. And as you can see, my PowerShell is opening to my C user admin directory. So just to show you, I'm going to open the File Explorer on my computer. I'm going to drag this down a bit. And just like the PowerShell terminal is saying, it is saying if you click on your C drive, the next folder is Users if you select Users folder, and the next folder is Admin if you select Admin. This is where your PowerShell terminal is opening to. So look on your computer, whatever address you see here, make sure you go into that directory. So the next thing we will do is move our key pair into this directory that PowerShell always open to. The reason why I always move my key pair into this directory is because if your key pair is in a different directory, first you have to change your directory into that directory or specify the paths to that directory when you SSH into your EC2 instance. So to make it easy to SSH into our EC2 instance without specifying an additional path or changing our directory, all we have to do is move our key pair into this directory. So I'm going to go back to my downloads directory where my key pair is. Then I'll right click on my key pair and click Cut. Once you cut it from the downloads directory, we will go into the home directory. Make sure you right click anywhere in here. Don't paste it in any of this folder. Right click on any open space here and click Paste. And when you paste it, you will see in your home directory, the key pair is there. Once you have pasted the key pair in your home directory, let's close PowerShell for now. Now that we have created the security groups and the key pair, the next thing we will do is launch our EC2 instances. The first EC2 instance we will launch is the EC2 instance in the private subnet that we want to SSH into. To launch the EC2 instance, select the EC2 dashboard, and in the EC2 dashboard, click Launch Instance and select Launch Instance again. Give the instance a name. Once you've given the instance a name, scroll down. Under Application and OS Images, select the Quick Start tab, and on the Quick Start tab, select Amazon Linux. Make sure it is Amazon Linux 2, and you should see free tier here. Scroll down. Under Instance Type, it is going to be T2 Micro. It is also free tier. Scroll down. Under Key Pair, we will select this drop down and select the key pair we created previously. Then scroll down. Under Network Settings, click Edit. Under VPC, select the VPC in your account with the public and private subnet. I'm going to select this drop down and select the dev VPC. Under subnet, select a private subnet. I'm going to click this drop down and I'll select my private app subnet AZ1. Under firewall security groups, select an existing security group. I'm going to scroll down, then select this drop down and make sure you select the web server security group. Then scroll down. These are all the settings we need for the EC2 instance we are launching in the private subnet. And you can see those settings here. Once you have reviewed the settings, click Launch Instance. We have successfully launched the EC2 instance. Scroll down and click View All Instances. There you go. This is the EC2 instance we just launched, and this EC2 instance is in the private subnet. How to tell whether your EC2 instance is in the private subnet is if you select it and under Details. So when you launch an EC2 instance and that EC2 instance is in a private subnet, the EC2 instance would not have a public IPv4 address. So next, let's launch our Bastion host in the public subnet. I'm going to select Launch Instances, and I'll give the instance a name. I'll call it Bastion host. Once you've given the EC2 instance a name, scroll down. Under Application and OS Images, we are going to select the Quick Start tab. On the Quick Start tab, make sure you have selected Amazon Linux 2 and it is free tier eligible. Scroll down. Under Instance Type, make sure you have selected T2 Micro, which is also free tier eligible. Then scroll down. Under Key Pair, select the drop down and select the key pair we created previously. Then scroll down. Under Network Settings, click Edit. Then under VPC, select the drop down and select the VPC in your account with the public and private subnet. For me, it is the dev VPC. I'll select it. Then for subnet, we are going to select this drop down and we want to select a public subnet in this VPC. For me, I'm going to select the public subnet AZ1. Then scroll down. Under Firewall Security Groups, we will select an existing security group. Then select this drop down and we will select the SSH security group. Scroll down. These are all the settings we need for this EC2 instance, and you can see those settings here. Once you have reviewed the settings, click Launch Instance. We have successfully launched the Bastion host. Scroll down and click View All Instances. There you go. You can see the Bastion host and the web server. Remember, the Bastion host has to be launched in a public subnet. And how you can tell that your Bastion host is in the public subnet is select it. And under public IPv4 address, you will see that it has an IP. As opposed to our web server that is in the private subnet, if we select it, it does not have a public IPv4 address. So now that we have launched the Bastion host and the web server in the private subnet, to SSH into the web server in the private subnet, first we will SSH into the Bastion host in the public subnet. Once we have SSH into it, we will now SSH into our web server in the private subnet. To use PowerShell to SSH into your EC2 instance in the private subnet, these are the steps you have to follow. First, I want you to open the PowerShell terminal on your computer. But this time when you open the PowerShell terminal, make sure you open it as an admin. So in the search box, type PowerShell. And when you see the Windows PowerShell app here, right-click on it and select Run as Administrator. It is going to ask you a question. Select Yes. Once you have opened the PowerShell terminal as an administrator, you should see it here. It says Administrator Windows PowerShell. Then the next thing we will do is check whether SSH agent is running on our computer. To check whether SSH agent is running, we will run these commands. I will leave these commands in this video's description. So I'm just going to move it to the side and I'm going to move this here. The first command we will run here will check whether SSH agent is running. So I'm going to copy it and I'll come to my PowerShell terminal and paste it there and press enter. There you go. When you run this command to check whether SSH agent is running, you will get an output. And as you can see under my output, for the name SSH agent, the status is stopped. So this means that SSH agent is not running on my computer. So the next thing we are going to do is start the SSH agent. To start the SSH agent, we are going to run this command. I'm going to copy it, come back to my PowerShell terminal and paste it here and press enter. The command ran successfully. Now if I check the status of the SSH agent again, so this command is the same as that one. I'm going to copy this and paste it here, then press enter. Now you can see for my output, the status is saying running. Once the status of your SSH agent is running, the next thing we are going to do is load our private key that is on our computer into that SSH agent. This step is very important. This is how you are able to SSH from the Bastion host into the instance in the private subnet. So the command is SSH add and the path to where our key pair is. Remember that I moved the private key into the home directory on my computer. So whatever directory you moved your private key to, you want to specify the full path to that private key. So on my computer, the key pair will be in the C drive, users, admin, and this is the name of the key pair. So once you've specified SSH add and the full path to where your private key is located on your computer, copy this command. Then come back to your PowerShell terminal and paste it there and press enter. And there you go. When you run this command to load your private key into the SSH agent, you will get this output that says identity added. And here it will show you the path to your private key. Once you have started the SSH agent on your computer and load your private key into it, we don't need to run PowerShell as admin anymore. So what we will do is we will close it. Next, we will open PowerShell again. And this time when we open PowerShell, we will open it the normal way. To show you what I mean, select the Start menu on your computer and type PowerShell in the search box. When you see the PowerShell appear, instead of opening it as admin, we are just going to click it to open it. And this time when you open PowerShell, you will see that it has opened PowerShell into your home directory. So now we can SSH into our EC2 instance in the private subnet. Remember, to SSH into the EC2 instance in the private subnet, first we have to SSH into the Bastion host. And to SSH into the Bastion host, let's go to the management console to copy the public IPv4 address. In the management console, select your Bastion host, copy the public IPv4 address. Then come back to PowerShell again. In PowerShell, the command we will use to SSH into the Bastion host is SSH space -A. When you type your SSH command, make sure you type the -A flag. This is very important. This is what will allow us to SSH from our Bastion host into the instance in the private subnet using agent forwarding. So once you type the -A, add another space. Then we will enter the username of our EC2 instance. The username of the EC2 instance is EC2-user @ then paste the public IPv4 address of your Bastion host. This is the command we will use to SSH into our EC2 instance. And I am not specifying the path to my private key because my private key is in the same directory that I'm running the command from. Once you've typed your command, press enter. The first time you SSH into an EC2 instance, it is going to ask you this question. Type yes and press enter. And there you go. We have SSH into the Bastion host. You can tell we are in the Bastion host because if we look at this IP address and go to the management console, it is the same private IP address of the Bastion host. Now that we have SSH into the Bastion host in the public subnet, from this Bastion host, we can now SSH into the EC2 instance in the private subnet. So what we are going to do is, we are going to select our web server in the private subnet, then copy the private IPv4 address. Once you copy the private IPv4 address, come back to PowerShell. In PowerShell, to SSH into the web server in the private subnet, we will type SSH space, then paste the IP address you just copied there. So remember, the command to SSH into your EC2 instance in the private subnet from the Bastion host is SSH space, the private IP address of the server in the private subnet you are trying to SSH into. Then, once you type your command, press enter. The first time you try to SSH into an EC2 instance, it will ask you this question. We are going to type yes and press enter. There you go. We have successfully used PowerShell to SSH into an EC2 instance in the private subnet. If you look at the private IP address here, and I come to the management console, it is the same private IP address of my web server in the private subnet. So if you are one of those people that does not like to use PuTTY to SSH into your EC2 instance, this is how you can use PowerShell to SSH into an EC2 instance in the private subnet. Before we end this lecture, let's clean up our environment. I'm going to close PowerShell. In the management console, I'm going to terminate both instances. So I'm going to select the second one. Make sure you select your web server and the Bastion host. Then select instance state and select terminate instance. Then click terminate. We have successfully terminated both instances. I'm going to click refresh. We have successfully terminated both instances. This is how you can use PowerShell to SSH into an EC2 instance in the private subnet. If you have any questions on this lecture or there's any part you don't understand, please leave your comments below. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye.